You are looking at a jar of submerged eggs sitting on a pantry shelf. 8 months from now, you crack one open and fry it like it was laid yesterday. No fridge, no freezer, no electricity. This isn't a trick, it's water glassing, a preservation method your great-grandparents relied on. But there's a reason stores don't use it. And if you get one rule wrong, you can ruin your entire stash. This is water glassing, a preservation technique detailed in Fanny Farmer's 1896 cookbook that can keep eggs shelf-stable for over a year. With egg prices tripling in a single season and supply chains failing, that old jar is suddenly worth a lot more than nostalgia. But the USDA calls it unreliable and potentially dangerous. And the gap between Grandma's pantry and modern safety warnings hides a detail that changes everything. The detail is a natural coating called the bloom. It's a microscopic protein film. The hen deposits on the shell right before laying, an invisible seal that blocks bacteria and oxygen from penetrating the porous shell. Water glassing doesn't replace that defense, it locks it in. Without bloom, the lime solution acts not as a barrier, but as an invader, seeping through the shell and ruining the egg from the inside. That's why Fanny Farmer's 1896 cookbook didn't treat water glassing as a household hack. It was standard agrarian knowledge, passed from a time when every home kept chickens and no one owned a refrigerator. By 1921, the U.S. Department of Agriculture itself published Farmer's Bulletin number 1132, an official document that walked families through the process in precise detail. 2 ounces of sodium silicate to 1 gallon of water. Freshly laid, unwashed eggs, a cool cellar. The bulletin assured Americans that eggs so treated would keep practically unchanged for over 6 months. Fast forward to today, and the modern USDA website warns against the very practice its predecessor endorsed. The same agency that once handed you the recipe now calls it unreliable and potentially dangerous. So, what happened between 1921 and now? The electric grid happened, Leontine and refrigerated shipping happened. A multi-billion-dollar cold chain was built, and a method that required zero energy, zero machinery, and zero corporate infrastructure became an inconvenience to an industry that profits from movement and spoilage. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's a documented shift, documented in Extension Service records, where bulletins that had championed traditional preservation were quietly pulled and replaced with guidance on proper refrigerator temperature settings. Meanwhile, the knowledge didn't vanish entirely. It retreated to the quietest corners of the country. Amish and Mennonite families kept the practice alive. Old homesteading books held the recipes. And now, as egg prices triple and hurricane outages can last weeks, that quiet knowledge is suddenly loud again. But I need to stop you before you start mixing lime and water, because the USDA isn't entirely wrong. Water glassing can go catastrophically wrong when you miss one factor. It's not the lime, it's not the jar, and it's not the storage spot. It's a mistake that happens before you ever touch a measuring cup, and a single cracked egg in the jar can take down every single one around it. The factor is so simple that most people never think to check it, and it's the reason the USDA's current warning and the old Fanny Farmer recipe can both be right at the same time. Freshness isn't just about how recently the egg was laid. It's about what happened to the egg between the nest box and your kitchen. An egg that has been refrigerated, even for a few hours, is ruined for water glassing. When a cold egg hits room temperature air, moisture condenses on the shell like a cold glass on a summer day. That thin film of sweat does more than make the shell damp. It lifts and washes away the bloom, the very coating that water, glassing, relies on. Without bloom, the shell becomes an open doorway, and the pickling lime solution, which is supposed to seal that doorway shut, instead pours right through it. Here is what happens at the microscopic level. Pickling lime is calcium hydroxide. When you dissolve it in water, you create an intensely alkaline solution with a pH above 12. That alkalinity is the defense. Bacteria and mold cannot survive in it. But the solution works by a second, quieter mechanism. The calcium hydroxide reacts with carbon dioxide in the water and the air gap of the jar to form microscopic crystals of calcium carbonate. Those crystals settle into the pores of the eggshell, fusing with the bloom to form a permanent mineral seal. It's the same chemistry that forms limestone in caves, sped up inside a glass jar. If the bloom is present, that seal forms perfectly. The egg inside stays essentially suspended, unchanged for 8 months, 12 months, even 18 months. But if the bloom has been washed or sweated away, the lime solution makes direct contact with the egg's inner membrane. That membrane is selectively permeable. Water passes through. The lime migrates into the albumin, and slowly, from the inside out, it begins to denature the proteins in the white. The egg doesn't rot in the traditional sense. It curdles. The white turns watery and pinkish. The yolk stiffens, and when you crack it open months later, you find a sour, chemically altered mess that smells more like wet plaster than breakfast. This is the failure mode the USDA alludes to when it calls water glassing unreliable. And they are right to warn you, because modern egg handling is almost perfectly designed to strip the bloom. Commercial eggs are washed and sanitized by law. Even many farm-fresh eggs sold at markets are refrigerated during transport. If you didn't pull that egg from a nest box yourself and bring it straight to the jar, you have no guarantee the bloom is whole. But that's only the first rule. Even if your eggs are flawless, fresh, and unwashed, a single hairline crack in one shell changes everything. A cracked egg isn't just a leaker. It's a breach in the chemical fortress you just built. The lime solution, for all its alkalinity, cannot penetrate the yolk sac or the thick white fast enough to sterilize what pours out of a crack. Bacteria that were already inside the egg, harmless while the shell was intact, now multiply in a nutrient-rich pocket that the lime water cannot reach. The solution around it stays clear. The jar looks fine, but inside that submerged crack, a colony blooms. And as that egg slowly decomposes, it releases gases and enzymes that drift through the water and weaken the seal on every egg nearby. One cracked egg can cascade into a jar full of spoiled inventory, and you won't spot it until you pull the lid months later, and the smell hits you. But the most treacherous mistake has nothing to do with the egg. It has to do with the one ingredient you assume is foolproof: pickling lime. Most hardware store lime is not food grade. It contains aluminum compounds, anti-caking agents, and trace heavy metals that you do not want suspended in a shelf-stable solution surrounding food you plan to eat. And if you use the original water glassing recipe from that 1921 USDA bulletin, you won't use lime at all. You'll use sodium silicate, a chemical that dissolves differently, seals differently, and carries its own set of rules that almost no one remembers anymore. The quiet history of that formula switch holds a warning nobody tells you. Sodium silicate is the chemical that gave water glassing its name. Dissolved in water, it forms a liquid that dries into a hard, glassy film. Unlike pickling lime, which works by filling pores with mineral crystals, Sodium silicate coats the entire shell in a brittle, impermeable layer. It's faster, cheaper, and far less forgiving. The USDA's 1921 bulletin recommended it because, at the time, sodium silicate was a common household item sold for preserving everything from eggs to laboratory specimens. No one warned you that it could also eat through skin. The switch to pickling lime didn't happen because lime was superior. It happened because World War II drained the sodium silicate supply. The chemical was redirected to things like concrete sealers, welding rods, and waterproofing for military rations. Farmers who'd saved their own recipes swapped in hydrated lime, the same stuff used for making pickles crisp, and discovered, to their surprise, that it worked more gently and gave them a wider margin of error. But here's the part almost nobody tells you. Some old-timers never switched. And if you stumble across an original recipe today, maybe in a brittle family notebook or a pre-war homesteading pamphlet, you might be tempted to recreate it without understanding what you are holding. Here is where it gets dangerous. Hardware store sodium silicate, often sold as liquid glass for sealing concrete or repairing mufflers, is not food grade. It contains industrial additives and trace contaminants never intended for anything you'd eat. Even food-grade sodium silicate, which you can buy from specialty chemical suppliers, demands protective gloves and precise mixing ratios. Too little, and the seal fails, allowing bacteria to slip through a micro crack you cannot see. Too much, and the solution itself becomes caustic enough to slowly break down the shell from the outside, leaching into the white and leaving a faint metallic taste that registers more as a tingle on your tongue than a flavor. And because sodium silicate seals so completely, a submerged egg with a hairline crack doesn't leak outward where you'd notice it. It traps the contamination inside, like a miniature bomb waiting for the day you crack it into a hot pan. This is the quiet failure mode that earned water glassing its reputation as unpredictable, not because the method doesn't work, but because the recipe drifted. A woman in rural Ohio in 1948, writing in her farm journal, notes that she lost an entire batch of eggs to the new kind of water glass. She'd bought silicate from a different supplier, and the eggs tasted, her words, like licking a tin roof. She never used it again, and she told her neighbors. Word traveled. The consolidated memory of the community wasn't that she'd used the wrong chemical. It was that the old method had failed. Multiply that across thousands of farms. Throw in a government agency that now had refrigerators to promote, and you see how a tradition eroded. But the Amish and Plain communities, who keep their own supply chains and buy only what they can verify, never made that mistake. They stuck with food-grade pickling lime, bought from the same suppliers they trust for canning and leather curing. They don't experiment with ancient bulletins. They follow the recipe their grandmother taught them, and the one her grandmother taught her, and the one that still works today, because nothing in it has changed. Now, even with the right lime, the right eggs, and the right jar, there are two more rules you have to know. One involves the one thing you will want to do every time you walk past your pantry. The other involves a test that takes 5 seconds and will save you from ever cracking a bad egg into your dinner. And the first person to ever document these rules scientifically was a professor in Maine who had no idea he was preserving his grandmother's memory. His name was Dr. Alfred Bushway, and in 1994, the University of Maine Cooperative Extension ran a controlled study that no one remembers got published. Bushway and his team took 600 eggs straight from the nest box, submerged them in pickling lime according to the old Fanny Farmer ratio, and stored them in a cool basement for 11 months. When they broke the seal, The eggs tested indistinguishable from fresh laid. Yolk height, albumin thickness, bacterial load, all of it. The only difference was a slight increase in alkaline pH on the shell surface, which washed off in 2 seconds under the tap. Bushway's grandmother had taught him the method. He just happened to be the one who put a clipboard behind her kitchen wisdom. That study confirmed what plain people already knew. The method works when you follow every rule. So here is exactly how to do it. 1 ounce of food-grade pickling lime per quart of cool filtered water, not tap water, because chlorine attacks the bloom. Mix the solution in a clean glass jar or food-grade plastic bucket. Use only unwashed eggs pulled from the nest within the last 24 hours. Never refrigerated, never wiped with a wet cloth. A dry brush if there's visible dirt, but nothing that lifts the cuticle. Lower the eggs gently, pointy side down, because the air cell at the blunt end will float them if they shift, and a floating egg risks cracking against the lid. Fill the jar, seal it airtight, and place it somewhere between 50 and 70 degrees, away from direct light. Not a root cellar that freezes, not a laundry room that spikes to 80. A cool, dark pantry. Then, and this is the rule, Bushway discovered that no one ever mentions, do not touch it. Not a stir, not a peek, not a jostle. The lime will settle into a layer on the bottom, and every instinct tells you to swirl it back. Don't. The settled lime has done its job. It sealed the bloom within the first 48 hours. Stirring just risks cracking a shell and introducing oxygen to a sealed system. When you pull an egg months later, it will look the same as the day you put it in. The shell may feel slightly rougher, a faint mineral texture from the calcium carbonate crystals. Rinse it under cold water for 5 seconds. Then, before you crack it into any dish, do the float test. Fill a glass with cold water. Drop the egg in. A fresh egg sinks flat. A water-glassed egg, even after a year, will sink flat. If it tips up or floats, the seal failed somewhere, and that egg goes to the hens or the compost. Not your breakfast. Not your breakfast. And here is the part that changes how you cook with them. After months in lime, the inner membrane tightens just enough that the egg behaves slightly differently under heat. The white is firmer, almost velvety, and it holds its shape in a poaching pan better than any grocery store egg you've ever cracked. The yolk stands taller in the skillet, a rich orange dome that tells you the nutrients haven't degraded, because refrigeration slows decay, but it does not stop it. Freezing bursts the cell walls. Dehydration strips the fat. Water glassing, done right, suspends the egg in a stasis that keeps everything intact. Proteins don't denature. Vitamins don't oxidize. The egg inside that jar is biologically identical to the one the hen pushed out into the nest straw. The Amish families in Lancaster County who still stock their pantries with these jars don't think of it as a survival skill. It's just Tuesday. It's the same reason they keep a lime bucket next to the canning jars and a root cellar that doesn't need a backup generator. They don't wait for a shortage to know what they already have. But if you are going to do this, there is one final warning. It's not about the eggs, the lime, or the seal. It's about what happens after. Because when you get used to cracking open a perfect farm-fresh egg in the middle of February while the snow piles up outside, you start to ask questions about everything else in your fridge. And the answers are not always comfortable. But they are learnable. A jar of submerged eggs sitting on a pantry shelf isn't just breakfast insurance. It's proof that the most reliable technology in your home is often the oldest, the one that requires no update, no subscription, and no permission. The Amish never stopped knowing this. Alfred Bushway's grandmother never stopped knowing this. And now you know it too. The question is what you do next. If you could preserve one skill from your grandparents' generation and bring it fully back into your kitchen, what would it be? Drop it in the comments because your answers tell me what to cover next. If this video earned your attention, hit subscribe, not for the algorithm, for what comes after, because the next one digs into a lost method that makes your refrigerator look like the most expensive habit you never noticed you had.